We have a panel featuring legal, tax, and financial experts to discuss succession planning and risk management on the farm. This panel is sponsored by Cooperators. Thank you to them for their generous support of our event. I'll now invite Joanna Croissant up. She is the Strategic Client Manager for the Cooperators to say a few words about their work and introduce the next set of moderators. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. You can hear me, I assume. As Jill introduced me, my name is Joanna Croissant. I am a Strategic Client Manager with Cooperators, and I manage the relationships with our member organizations and cooperators in the 4 Western provinces. I'm here today to bring all of you greetings from Cooperators and congratulate you on your 40-year anniversary. We, as Cooperators, were started almost 75 years ago. We have a history as a cooperative, and we take long-term view of businesses and relationships, and we are here to put people first. To expand a little bit on what Carly had mentioned within the Hub program, Cooperators has a member benefits program, and we also have a booth in the break room, so please come visit us if you want to chat insurance. I know everybody wants to talk about insurance. The products that are housed within our member benefits program that Cooperators offers are home insurance, farm insurance, travel insurance, commercial insurance, all of those things. So every one of those products is going to have exclusive coverage and savings. And what I would suggest is stopping by the booth. We've got a couple of advisors here today that will be able to answer any of your questions, or reach out to a local advisor in your area to ask about your farm insurance. I know that you've got some incredibly important topics to tackle and conversations to have here in the next couple days. So I'm going to get right into the introduction on our panel here. Today we have Leon Fingstel, who has over 30 years of experience in the financial services industry. He holds a certified financial planning designation, a chartered life underwriter designation, and a trust and estate practitioner designation. So he's well versed. Prior to joining Cooperators, Leon was most recently the manager of wealth management services for a large Manitoba credit union. And prior to joining the credit union system and Credential Asset Management in late 2019, he spent 21 years with a large Canadian bank where his career included roles such as Regional VP, Aboriginal Trust Services, Regional Director of Life Insurance, Commercial Deposit and Treasury Specialist, Investment and Retirement Planner, and Retail Branch Manager. He's currently based out of Winnipeg here and specializes in investment and retirement planning for farm and family business tax and estate planning, as well as advanced insurance planning, including group retirement and employee benefit programs. So lots of planning, lots of experience, lots of education there, and I'm hoping you guys get quite a bit of info out of today's panel. So Leon, if you want to come on up, and I'll head down. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Joanna, for that great introduction. It's an absolute thrill to be here with you today. I thought I would start out by giving you a little bit of a background of how we arrived at this discussion material and how we arrived at myself being here with you today. And then that would help lead into our discussion on the farm succession planning piece. I had the opportunity to participate in the CAP golf tournament in June of this last summer, and it was an absolute thrill to meet your CAP administrative team, and Colin and Brenna, and had the great opportunity to golf with your very own Jill Verwey and Jerry Friesen. I believe Jerry's in the crowd today. I think he's speaking a little bit later today. And we had a great time at the golf tournament. The beauty of the golf tournament in golfing is that you get that 4.5 to 5+ hours to visit and talk and great conversation and great debate and a little bit of hijinks and all that kind of stuff. And I'll share with you what came out of that time together and that led to this opportunity. And you've just heard about the great relationship that Cooperators has with CAP and the member benefits that are available to you in terms of enhanced coverages and discounts on farm and home insurance and travel insurance and those sorts of things. But those of you who know Jill, she's always looking for more. And one of the things that she posed to me was, this is a great relationship, but Leon, how can we add to it? What can we do to build onto this relationship? And of course, we had that 4.5 to 5 hours or so to talk about those things, and that's led us to this opportunity here today. And I said, well, from a financial planner's perspective, I spend my whole day providing advice to clients. I think the one aspect that we can add to this is the aspect of advice. And we talked more about that, and we talked with Colin and Brenna about that piece and how can we add the advice piece to our relationship. And I'll tell you more about that as we move forward here today. And in addition to that, then became the question of, Leon, do you have any background in agriculture? And this is where things really took off. I said, well, as a matter of fact, I do. Both of my sets of grandparents were farmers. My mom's family, my great-grandparents on my mom's side came over from England and settled in the what's now Kelso, Saskatchewan region, but that was back in the day before Saskatchewan was a province. It was in the Northwest Territories. At that time, it was called the Northwest Territories. And they had a very small subsistence-based farm, right? A couple of cows, a couple of chickens, and 2 quarters of land. And the unfortunate part, it was a very pretty little place, but the little Pipestone Creek ran through the 1 quarter and made it virtually, basically suited to a couple of cows, and that was about it. And when they made the decision to retire, they eventually had to sell off that piece of land so that they had some money to retire. My dad's family were dairy farmers. And my grandfather came over from Austria just before the Second World War and purchased this land near Odessa, Saskatchewan, a little German community there, and started up his dairy farm. And my dad was one of 8 children, 5 sisters, 3 boys. My dad being the oldest. And as we talk about as a family, everybody got the heck out of there as quick as they could type of thing, because farming's tough and dairy farming's even tougher. And this was back in the days before, it blows my mind now, the robotic milking machines and everything that I see on farms today. And my dad got a job in town as an electrician with a local electrician. But every morning we got up and we went to the farm and we helped out with the milking. And when Dad's job was over at 4:30 or 5, we headed out to the farm and did the evening milking and whatever chores were needed to be done before sundown and that sort of thing. And my grandfather was an interesting fellow. If you could, in your mind, imagine Arnold Schwarzenegger with that deep Austrian accent. And the only communication we really had with Grandpa was, today we're picking rocks. Today we're fixing fence. I think we had border collies, and I think he spoke more to the border collies than he did to us. And it was, Tippy, go get the cows. And Tippy would go round up the cows and milking would begin. And so when I shared that story, then the question was, well, Leon, what happened? You didn't like farming? You didn't want to farm? And I said, well, actually, on the contrary, if you'd asked me when I was a young boy what I wanted to do in life, I had two answers for you. I wanted to be Bobby Orr's right shot defense partner, and I wanted to be a farmer. Unfortunately, neither one of those things happened, and I'll lead into that, and that's the backstory of why we're talking about farm succession planning. It was never spoken about, but the belief was that my father and subsequently myself that we would inherit that dairy farm. And you can imagine the surprise one day after evening milking, and we're sitting there having dinner, and grandmother's a great cook, and a piece of apple pie. And my grandfather was rolling his cigarettes, and he'd been in the city earlier that day, rolling his cigarettes, put a cigarette in his mouth, lit it, took a big puff on it, and said, "I saw the doctor today. I got the cancer." That was it. Got up and he said, "I'm tired, I'm going to bed." So what that led to, as the information got out to the rest of the family, as my dad would put it, the vultures started circling. So everybody came home. Folks who haven't set foot on that farm in over a decade came home and wanted their piece of the farm. And the fighting and the arguing started. And, to this day, I've got aunts and uncles I haven't seen in over 40 years. I got cousins I've never met. And, from that scenario. And I remember a couple of weeks later, it may have been months, I'm not exactly sure, I was about 10, 11 years old. Again, evening milking was done, we had dinner, and everybody was there, and arguing and everything, and my grandfather was rolling his cigarette, put a cigarette in his mouth, lit it, took a big puff, and he said, "I went to see the doctor today. I've got less than a year to live, so I went to see the lawyer. I sold the farm today, bought a house in town. October 1st, everybody out." And that was it, right? And I honestly thought I heard my father's heart hit the floor, because that changed our lives right there. That changed everything that we thought was going to happen. As I'm telling that story to Colin and Brenna and to Jill, everybody agreed that we needed to have this broader discussion here today. We needed to get that discussion out there and that message out there and keep talking about it with CAP members. They've asked me to write an article on farm succession planning, which was included in the Farmer's Voice December edition, so you may have saw that. And we worked on this opportunity here today. And one of the things I learned very early in my financial planning career is that not only financial planning and tax and estate planning in general, but specifically for farm families and business owners, it becomes a very complex and multifaceted approach with the need for varying experts and expertise to be involved in that process. And one of the things I also learned very early on in my career was that the best client outcomes happen when all of your advisors are collaborating, communicating, and working closely together to provide that best outcome for the client and their family. So with that in mind, I've invited a couple of friends with me today. We've got with us Sean Friesen with the accounting firm BDO, and we have Joanna Caithness from the law firm Fillmore Riley. And I'm going to ask them to, because they know themselves best, to introduce themselves, and we'll start with Joanna. And then we'll get into a discussion about farm succession planning from the financial planner perspective, from the lawyer's perspective, as well as the accountant. So we'll get right into this. Over to Joanna.
Thanks, Leon. I managed to turn this on. So I'm happy to be here. I actually really enjoy working with our farming clients. The files are very interesting. There's a lot to work with. You have to get to know their family situation and get to know them personally. It's not just sort of an abstract theoretical legal problem to work on. So, and it's a really important topic. So I'm a partner at Fillmore Riley. My practice is heavily tax-based. I do corporate tax and personal tax and a lot of
Portugal Prairie BDO is where I work. I live actually in a smaller town, McGregor. I didn't move very far. That's where I grew up, and that's where I ended up living back in. My family's always been involved in farming on both sides. I think that's a very common thing I've found in my work as well. Many families all started off as farmers. But there's, been a divergence in the last couple of generations, obviously. My own family, we had a farm. My dad had a dairy. It was a lot of work. Couldn't make a go of it, but he couldn't ever let the farm go. He's always had cattle, even up until the day he passed away. It was always in his blood. And I loved living on the farm, but I really didn't love being a farmer. And hence, that's why you see me here, because I'd rather read books and do tax calculations instead of the hard work that the farmers do.
Thank you very much. When we were prepping for this opportunity, we put our heads together and we said, what are the major questions that we receive from our clients when we're starting these discussions with them? And I know when I sit down with clients and I start talking about financial planning, tax and estate planning, retirement planning pieces, and I ask, one of the first questions I ask, do you have a current and up-to-date will in place? What kind of planning have you done for, and particularly on the farm and the business side, for that succession planning piece? And we'll start with Joanna. I often get the acknowledgement from clients that we know we need to do something, but we just don't know what that is, and we don't know how to start or where to start. And so we decided we wanted to start with that question, and I'll throw that over to Joanna to start with that piece.
Sure. I think, at the heart of it is that these are super hard decisions and very hard concepts to grapple with. Frankly, dying, for one, and also making really tough decisions about the future, and sometimes there is no easy answer. And so it can be very intimidating because you're involving like livelihood that is generational, that has been in the family and often for many decades. A huge source of wealth for the family, and particularly with land values. And the emotional attachment and the financial together make things very difficult. It's very similar to family cottages, only on a larger scale and a more, I think, important scale, frankly. And so I think people look at it and they know they need to, but it's very hard to actually get going because it's hard to grapple with those questions and it's hard to know where to start. So I think generally it actually, the accountants are the first line because most farmers have an accountant. They need to file tax returns. Lots of them don't really have a lawyer that they deal with frequently. And so it often does start out with the accountants, but it's sort of just taking the first step and speaking to someone. And you don't have to know what you want to do. You don't have to know any of the legal terms. You don't have to know any of the options. Sometimes people come, they say, oh, I need a trust or I need this. And maybe they do, maybe they don't. But it's more just calling, and then we're the ones who are supposed to ask the right questions, get the right information, and then give you options for what you might be able to do. You're the client, we cater to you, we give you the information, and then you'll make the decision based on that. So you don't need to do a ton of legwork at the front end, you just basically need to email or call, and we can go from there.
Yeah, the big thing is start the dialogue. It's these are hard things to think about for everybody, right? Like your own death, your own retirement, those sorts of things, but they happen to everybody. And if you can start at least the conversation going with your family, with your accountant, with whoever you feel comfortable, somebody, and then at least you can start thinking about things because they are inevitable. We got to deal with them at some point, and it is a choice to do nothing, but it's not the best choice always, right? So you start thinking. I always say, and to Joanna's point, it's an intimidating thing, but we all play to our strengths, right? Like I'm not a farmer. You don't want me in your tractor. I'm going to make a mess of things. But come to me with your questions for how we can deal with your life events. I've been doing this for a long time. I've gone through all the courses. I know a lot of the tax stuff, it's a deep dive, it's intimidating, and nobody wants to do the wrong thing. And you know what? We might end up doing the wrong thing. We don't know, but at least we start doing something. And that conversation is a perfect spot. And if you were my client, I'd be asking you every year, you know, what's your plan? Do you have a will? Do you have your power of attorney updated? Those minimum things. What's your plan when you kick the bucket? Because we all do.
One of the next things we talked about was the importance of communication and the need to get started sooner rather than later. And specifically when we start talking about non-farming siblings. And in financial planning, we have a catchphrase, so to speak, where we talk about is equal necessarily fair? And so I'm going to propose the question to our experts here. How do we deal with the non-farming siblings in that discussion? What are the pros and cons of some of the opportunities of dealing with that, and what's the best way of dealing with that situation of non-farming siblings?
I think, firstly, my ideal file involves discussions with all of those children from the outset, rather than the parents imposing a plan on the children. And worst case scenario is the children finding out the plan once the parents are gone. It doesn't work in practice because the children don't have the opportunity to make their views known. They don't have the opportunity to engage in discussions, to ask questions, to maybe understand why things were done, because sometimes understanding the why makes it easier to accept the outcome. I think that we do have ways to deal with making things equitable as best as possible between farming and non-farming siblings, and it does become, frankly, difficult, and sometimes there is no perfect answer. Sometimes the farm is worth so much and the other assets are not worth enough to give other assets to the siblings that are not involved in the farm. And the choice at that point is, okay, well, do we include those siblings in some capacity in the farm for economic benefit? Or do we that's just the way it is, and you know, that's the decision. So there are legal things that you can do in terms of putting agreements in place among all the siblings, and this is why you want them involved, because they need to agree to this. That, you know, when the time comes, sibling A, who is farming, will be, you know, this shareholder of the family farm, or however it's set up. The other siblings will receive interests, but they will be entirely passive. And then you have an agreement governing how the corporations run, who makes decisions, what if someone wants to sell, who can receive interest down the road, you know, at each, you know, in successive future generations. And that takes a lot of time and thought and discussion. So these processes aren't ones where you can go to the lawyer and within a month you've got like a, you know, comprehensive plan. It does often evolve where we will put interim wills in place, for example. That's good enough for now, and then we'll work on refining it as we go along. But you know, it's a process in terms of figuring out what you can do. Some plans take time to implement. If you're, you know, doing certain estate planning things, it takes a couple years before you can do another step, for example. And so, you know, it takes time, but it's getting going, engaging in the discussions, and recognizing that there may not be a solution that results in equal economic benefit for everybody at the end of the day.
Yeah, and there's a bit of a, you know, a dilemma between you know, lots of people want a simple estate plan, but it just can't happen anymore with certain farms, especially if the desire is for the legacy of the farm to continue and for successive generations to be content with each other, regardless if they're farming or not. So, you know, and with the value of everything going on right now, it's really important to spend the time to make sure that we're doing it right. I love working with farms because there's a lot of tools you can use. There's a lot of levers you can pull to transfer wealth around, to move values around and whatnot. So there's a lot of things we can look at doing to get to the right place, and that can work in conjunction with what Joanne's talking about. You know, you document how you want things to end up in your ideal frame of mind, and while everybody's in a good frame of mind, right? While everybody's agreeing, while everybody's happy, so that when the bad things like the death happens or disability or somebody wants to get out, these things are already covered. And we're not talking about them when people are emotional and that sort of thing. And further to, you know, the disparity in values, there's a big fear, and it's valid, that, you know, we got non-farming siblings, maybe my farming sibling is going to take the farm and he'll just wait for mom and dad to pass away, and he's going to just sell the land and take all the money and go. And then on the other side, we want to make sure that maybe the farming sibling is going to keep continuing to farm, and how do you do that without access to that land? How do you do that with a big debt to a non-farming sibling? It's a tough balance, and we have to have these huge, in-depth discussions to find out what's the right plan. Because it might be simple, what we thought of at one point, you know, 20 years ago, but land values aren't the same as what they are now. Land values have gone up, our kids have gotten married, they've got their own kids, all these different things have happened. So not only should we look at this, you know, today, we should schedule this to look at another 5 years and see if this is still the right plan.
Very, very important piece from a financial planning perspective, because I'm faced with that one, the non-farming siblings question constantly in my practice. And in fact, right now I'm dealing with a situation where a gentleman has approached me. He's 65 years old, has been farming on that family land since the day he was born. His son farms with him. His dad passed away about 20 years ago, and kind of like my situation where it was expected that the farm was his, and in fact his mother always said to him, the farm is yours. She just passed away last summer, and when it came time to read the will, he discovered that farm is split 50-50 between him and his sister, who again hasn't set foot on that farm in over 40 years. And he's come to me with looking for some help in how do I refinance? How do I keep this so that my son and I can continue to farm this? And how do we keep it in the next generation when my sister wants to sell it to the highest bidder? And so that really reinforced that discussion about starting early and proper communication. And it's not always an easy conversation, especially with those non-farming siblings, because you know, they lose sight of the fact that the one that's still farming has put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and equity into that farm, and they're just seeing the numbers. So plan may take a number of years to get to, but in the meantime, we're working towards that with interim wills and interim planning and corporate structures and that sort of stuff. Sean, we had talked in our initial meetings about C-208 legislation. Can you share some of your thoughts on that piece with us?
Yep, I got lots of thoughts on C-208. C-208 is a relatively new legislation that came out about 3 years ago, 2021, bipartisan House and Senate. It went through two main parts to the bill. Most people talk about the one. The big one is now you can, and this is not just for farmers, but of course it works really well for farmers, for incorporated farmers, where a mom and dad can take shares that they own in a family farming corporation and sell those shares to a corporation controlled by their child. That's a game changer. For about 40 years, we've had to deal with at least, if you tried to do that, mom and dad would not get a capital gain, which is what the desired outcome is. Mom and dad want to get a capital gain and claim their capital gains exemption. Capital gains exemption is 0% rate. That's pretty good. Anything beyond the $1,016,000 that's now eligible for capital gains exemption is taxed at 25% top tax rate. Still a pretty good deal. But if we would have done this before, we would have had a dividend, 47% tax rate. Not the outcome we wanted. This did happen a lot, and I think a lot of people got tripped up in this, because if you were to try to do this with a third party, if I came in and bought your business, bought your farm, bought your shares, as an unrelated party, we can do that. You can claim your capital gains exemption. I can use a corporation to buy you out. I want to use a corporation because I pay 9% tax in that corporation to finance that payout. So I got 91 cents left to pay you out. Now we can do this with kids and with parents. We couldn't. Or using it upon your passing, but then mom and dad aren't using it, the cash, and that's you know, it's good for the kids, maybe, but not for you, not for the parents. And then the other big part of it is now it allows siblings we could move some stuff around to different corporations, but if it was two siblings, we couldn't. And lots of times we had structures where we had two siblings running the farm, and maybe at some point they just wanted to split up. And we couldn't do it really in a tax-effective way or in a very smooth way. And now we have the capacity to do so. So I think there's two huge tools in our toolkit now that we can use for farming succession plan that's huge. That we can now split up farmers that want to get split up, and that we can have a mechanism where it's similar buyout to a third party. So I could keep going.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add. That summed it up pretty well.
Okay. So, Joanna, we talked about, from a legal standpoint, some of the tools that farmers have for succession planning. I know Sean touched on some of those, and we'll go back to Sean on this as well. But things like capital gains exemptions and the rollovers and those type of things. What are some of the tools that you use to build those structures for our farm families?
Yeah, so there are, within the Income Tax Act, a number of very favorable provisions that relate to farms and fishing operations in particular. Farming, actually, under the Income Tax Act is very broad. It's not just crops or cattle. It relates to tree farming, beekeeping. There's a whole bunch of things that farming includes within that. So we use these for succession planning in particular. And so one of them, and this is aside from the C208 provisions that Sean was just talking about. So one of them is that where you have a family farm corporation or farming property, so real property is, the land is generally the subject of it. If you are a grandparent or a parent, you can transfer that land to a child or to a grandchild where that land meets, certain tests in terms of being sufficiently used in a farming operation, and they're frankly complicated tests that we won't even bother going into, but if it qualifies, you can actually roll it over, which means that, say, you acquired that land in 1971 for $10,000 and it's now worth $1 million. You can actually transfer it to your child or grandchild. You don't have any tax, and then when they dispose of it down the road, however that happens, then they will have tax based on them acquiring it at $10,000. So that's significant because the exemption that Sean was talking about is just over $1 million. And so that exemption means you don't pay any tax on the increase in value up to just over $1 million. It's a very key provision, but the rollover provision is also important because there is no limit on it. And you are limited in your exemption. So if you've got shares of a family farm corporation or farmland, you can exempt $1 million. But if your farm is worth $5 million, you're still going to have a tax on $4 million, and at 25%, you're looking at $1 million worth of tax. If you can use that rollover, you defer that tax out generation, potentially generation after generation if it continues to qualify, and you can hand the family farm down through the family and defer that tax at this point indefinitely until the law changes.
Yeah, the rollover is a, everybody knows generally about the exemption because it saves tax, but the rollover, given land values now and the size of farming operations, the rollover is just such a key tool to make sure you qualify for, because if you have to pay that tax, and it triggers when you have a deeming event, right? So if either when you transfer shares to the next generation explicitly, or you die. And so, the accountants are always putting the fear into their clients to make sure we're clean, because you never know if something's going to happen to you and your spouse. Because the general rule is, when you pass away, you're deemed to sell everything at fair market value to your estate, certain exceptions being you have a surviving spouse. Okay, that's good. Hopefully you don't die in the same accident. If you do, then we have to look at the other carve-outs, and this is a huge carve-out, the ability to transfer farm or fishing property to the next generation, anywhere actually between cost and fair market value. So it's such a huge tool because you can then pick and choose your number. If it's just exactly your capital gains exemption, well then we're stepping up that cost base for the next generation so that it saves them tax in the future, and in the meantime we've used your exemption and not have to have paid tax on that. So if you keep wanting to transfer the farm down the line, which is the goal of many, many farms, it's the biggest tool in your arsenal.
And for our last subject here, I'm going to start with Joanna, and I hope I don't ambush her here a little bit on this one, but she's quick on her feet. Promoted this idea of putting things in joint names with your kids. And we've seen some recent court cases and decisions that have come down with respect to resulting trust of whether it's bank accounts or the cottage and that sort of thing. Can you speak a little bit about to the non-farming assets and that whole idea of resulting trust?
I can. I love this topic not because everyone messes it up, but so many people have this misconception that if you put property in joint names, you avoid tax. You do not. You actually, if you don't do it properly, you actually accelerate the payment of the tax. So that is a very common misconception. So the nature of ownership does not defer tax or avoid tax. So if I have a farm, I've got a child, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to give my farm to my child. I don't want to pay tax. My farm's worth $2 million, and I put my kid's name on all the land jointly. If I don't really do it properly, I've actually disposed of half of my farmland at $1 million. If I do it properly, I'm still going to dispose of $2 million when I die. So I haven't changed anything. I haven't pushed it further out, and in fact, I may have made it come due sooner. You have to be very careful whenever you put someone else's name on your property. If it's still your property and you still want to use it, the starting point is don't give it away. And if you're going to put someone's name on it, don't just put their name on it. You have to go and get legal advice because, one, you may have a disposition for tax purposes. Two, you may be exposing that asset to your child's spouse if they were to separate or get divorced, and you might be exposing it to claims of the spouse. If you have tax debts, you may be exposing your child to liability for your tax debts. And that's something people don't think about. You may be exposing that asset to your child's other creditors. And fundamentally in Manitoba, we do not have probate fees anymore. So people would historically put assets in joint names so that when they died, that doesn't get listed as an asset of the estate and there's no probate fees on it. That's not a concern anymore if it's in Manitoba. And so we don't recommend putting property in joint names for that reason. Leon mentioned a resulting trust. What that means is that where a parent puts their adult child on an asset, farmland, a bank account, for whatever reason, the starting presumption is that they aren't actually gifting it to that child, and that child will continue to hold it for their estate or for the parent while they're alive, and then thereafter likely for their estate or for other siblings. So there's a whole body of law that's developed because in very recent years, as we have a more aging population, elderly parents, there's probate fees, they put their children on things, and so we've had to develop, okay, well, who actually gets this? And so the takeaway is don't do this without consulting with a lawyer in terms of figuring out how is this fitting into your overall plan, what's supposed to happen if you die, and what are the consequences of putting someone on title to an asset right now.
When I look at non-farming assets, my biggest concern is to make sure that we've got it segregated in the right place. Because when I'm looking at planning for the rolled over capital gains exemption in your farm, there's certain tests that need to be met. The biggest one is that you have 90% of your assets being farm assets. So that means you've got a buffer of about 10% where we can say you have non-farm assets. That doesn't just mean accountants or myself, I'll sometimes call cash a bad asset. It's not a bad asset. It's a great asset. Everybody loves cash, but I don't like too much cash in your corporation if it's going to throw us offside. Land values really help us with that 90% test now, right? Land values are really, really high. But at the same time, we don't want to start accumulating too many non-farm assets. And I'm not talking just cash. We have to be careful about, say, maybe there's an ancillary business that's not a farming business. Maybe there's a trucking component to it. Do we need to look at separating that business line out so that we're not throwing ourselves offside of the farming rules, but maybe also for liability reasons too. There might be valid reasons why we want to separate those out, just to protect ourselves so we don't spoil the whole batch of apples, right? One bad apple. Other assets too we have to watch out for could include, like I said, too much cash. Sometimes the cash surrender value of your life insurance, you just have to watch the levels of what it is. And just keep on top of that. When we have non-farming assets, we have to really make sure that it's not hugely significant either, because it could throw offside some of the stuff we could do maybe on a cash basis as well. So there's a bunch of reasons why non-farming assets are great, but not in the farming corporation or the farming structure.
Great stuff. We're just about the end of time here. Joanna, any final thoughts or things you want to share with the group?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we've already mentioned that it's just key to start talking about it, and even if you have no idea and all of this is just gibberish, and it is to a lot of people, frankly. And so, you just need to reach out to your accountant or your lawyer. I mean, we frequently deal with firms, like I'm in Winnipeg, but with lots of rural firms who don't do this type of work regularly, but they are the lawyer for the client, and we work together with them. They carry on with the client. We, come in, we help out, we are available as a resource, but we do not become your lawyers for all purposes because you have that long-standing relationship with the other lawyers. So, I actually really enjoy working with other law firms. It's a little isolating sometimes doing this type of work. So it's really actually nice to have files where I'm dealing with other offices and other professionals, because sometimes it's a little bit of me at my computer on my own.
It's intimidating, this stuff, succession planning, and it's complicated, and there's a lot more bureaucracy and red tape than there's ever been. Everywhere you look now, I see there's a filing here and there's filing here. Just the more valuable and more complex our operations are going to get is just going to mean a more complex succession plan with competing interests. So I just encourage you guys to remember to play to your strengths. Give it a lot of serious thought, but don't let it bury you, kind of thing. Don't let it not make you make a decision, because sometimes that happens too. So, just keep the conversations up. And if you don't make the decision this year, at least you're making a conversation. At least you're getting towards that goal. You're making those towards efforts. Yeah. That's about it.
Fantastic. I'll leave you with one last thought, and it's from a great friend of mine who is a lawyer and was the Associate Dean of Law at the University of Manitoba. And one of the things he always said to me is, Leon, and I'll apply this to accountants as well, lawyers don't get rich drafting wills and power of attorneys, but they do get rich litigating against estates that don't have a plan, that don't have a will, or one that's very poorly drafted. So please keep that in mind when you're talking to your professionals. They do great work for you, and they deserve to get paid too. I'll leave that
I'd
out
rather
there.
do the work at the start.
For the rest of the day, Cooperators has its booth in the breakout room, and if you have any questions, please come and reach out to me, and we can have those discussions. And I'll also be here for the banquet as well. So again, thank you very much to Sean and Joanna. Thank you very much for CAP for allowing us to have this conversation with you.
Thank you.